In a cluttered workshop on the outskirts of Riverside Heights, where the scent of wood shavings mingles with unwavering determination, Lawrence Gomez wipes sawdust from his weathered hands. For 15 years, he's built everything from custom furniture to playground equipment, earning just enough to support his young son after his wife's passing. But today is different. Today, he stands before Victoria Cooper, a powerful CEO whose wealth couldn't prevent her daughter's devastating accident. Her voice trembles as she admits defeat after countless failed treatments. Lawrence looks at 12-year-old Messi Cooper in her state-of-the-art wheelchair, then at his workbench covered with half-finished wooden prototypes. His mind races with possibilities as he speaks words that will change both their lives forever. "I can make your daughter walk again." Could a humble carpenter's ingenuity accomplish what million-dollar medical technology couldn't? Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story moves you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have something even more extraordinary waiting for you. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Gomez Custom Woodworks, casting long shadows across the workshop floor. Lawrence traced his fingers along the grain of a piece of oak he'd been saving for something special, something that would matter. At 42, his hands told the story of a man who built dreams from raw materials, calloused from years of precise work, gentle enough to comfort his 8-year-old son Diego when nightmares came calling. This wasn't just any workshop. Every corner held memories of challenges overcome through pure craftsmanship. In one area stood a custom wheelchair ramp he'd built for elderly Mrs. Patterson, not just functional, but beautiful, with carved handrails that made her feel dignified rather than disabled. Against another wall leaned a set of adaptive playground equipment he'd designed for the Riverside Heights Elementary School, ensuring that children with mobility issues could play alongside their friends. Lawrence had learned early that building wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about understanding what people truly needed, not just what they asked for. His late wife, Carmen, had been a physical therapist who taught him to see beyond the obvious. "Every body tells a story, Lawrence," she used to say while sketching ideas for adaptive furniture. "Our job is to listen and then create something that honors that story." The local community knew Lawrence as more than just a carpenter. He was the man who turned impossible requests into reality. When the Riverside Community Center needed accessible seating for their theater, Lawrence didn't just install ramps. He redesigned the entire space so that wheelchair users had the best views in the house. When teenage athlete Jake Morrison broke his back in a diving accident, Lawrence spent weeks creating a custom desk system that allowed Jake to continue his engineering studies from his hospital bed. But none of those projects had prepared him for what was about to walk through his workshop door. The sleek black Mercedes looked distinctly out of place in the gravel parking lot beside Lawrence's modest workshop. He watched through the window as a woman in an immaculate business suit emerged, her movements sharp and efficient, the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and closing deals. But there was something else in her posture, a tension that spoke of desperation carefully masked by professional composure. Victoria Cooper was Riverside Heights' most successful entrepreneur, the founder and CEO of Cooper Dynamics, a tech company that had revolutionized supply chain management for Fortune 500 companies. Her picture graced the covers of business magazines, and her keynote speeches inspired thousands of aspiring entrepreneurs. She had built an empire through sheer force of will and innovative thinking. But all her success meant nothing when she opened the rear door and carefully helped her daughter into a wheelchair. Messi Cooper had been the light of her mother's life, a vibrant 12-year-old who moved through the world like a dancer, whether she was performing in the school play, competing in gymnastics, or simply running through their estate's gardens. Her laughter had been the soundtrack to Victoria's rare moments of peace between business meetings and overseas calls. The accident had happened 6 months ago on a family ski trip to Alpine Ridge Resort. A collision with another skier, a moment of lost control, and Messi's world changed forever. The diagnosis was devastating: complete spinal cord injury at the L1 vertebrae. The prognosis from the country's top specialists was unanimous. Messi would never walk again. Victoria had thrown everything at the problem: the finest rehabilitation centers in Switzerland, experimental treatments at Johns Hopkins, cutting-edge robotics programs in Tokyo. She'd spent over $2 million seeking a miracle, consulting with 43 different specialists across 4 continents. Each consultation had ended the same way: sympathetic expressions, gentle explanations of quality of life, and recommendations to focus on adaptation. But Victoria Cooper hadn't built a tech empire by accepting limitations. She'd heard whispers about Lawrence Gomez through her assistant's network, stories about a carpenter who created impossible solutions for impossible problems. It sounded desperate, even foolish, but desperation had become Victoria's constant companion. As she wheeled Messi towards the workshop entrance, Victoria steeled herself for another disappointment. What could a small-town carpenter possibly offer that the world's leading medical experts couldn't? But watching Messi's eyes light up at the sight of the beautiful wooden creations in the workshop windows, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in months: a flicker of hope.
Inside the workshop, Lawrence set down his tools and walked toward the door. He'd received Victoria's call the night before, brief, professional, but tinged with the same desperate hope he'd heard in so many voices over the years. People came to him when conventional solutions failed, when they needed someone willing to think beyond the obvious. As the workshop door opened and Victoria guided Messi inside, Lawrence found himself looking not at a CEO in her daughter, but at a mother fighting for her child's future and a young girl whose spirit hadn't been broken by circumstance. This was about to become the most important project of his life, and Lawrence Gomez had never failed to deliver when it truly mattered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lawrence Gomez's day always began the same way, with the gentle creak of his grandfather's hand-carved toolbox opening. The mahogany case, worn smooth by 3 generations of craftsmen, held more than just chisels and planes. It carried the weight of family tradition, each tool telling its own story of problems solved and lives improved through patient, careful work. The workshop itself was a testament to Lawrence's philosophy, purposeful organization that made perfect sense to its owner. Shelves lined with reclaimed wood reached toward the vaulted ceiling, each piece carefully sorted by type and potential. What others saw as scraps, Lawrence saw as possibilities. A discarded church pew might become a custom reading nook for a child with mobility issues. Salvaged gymnasium bleachers could be transformed into adaptive seating for a community theater. In one corner stood his pride and joy, a workbench dedicated to what he called his special projects. Here, among the precision measuring tools and specialized jigs, Lawrence spent his evenings creating solutions that went far beyond simple carpentry. A half-finished adaptive easel for a young artist with limited arm mobility sat beside stacks of medical journals and engineering texts that he studied by lamplight after Diego went to bed. The local Riverside Heights Gazette had once called him the miracle maker of Maple Street, a nickname that embarrassed him but held more truth than most realized. Lawrence's reputation had been built not just on craftsmanship, but on his ability to see what others missed, to understand that behind every request for something different was a human being fighting for dignity, independence, and hope. His workshop walls told the story of 15 years of impossible requests made possible. Photographs showed smiling faces, elderly Mr. Hernandez using the custom garden tool that allowed him to tend his roses despite severe arthritis. Teenage Sarah Kim playing piano again on the adjustable bench system Lawrence had created after her car accident. The Henderson twins, born with cerebral palsy, laughing as they used their specially designed playground equipment that Lawrence had donated to Riverside Elementary. These projects never made him wealthy, Most of his clients were working families who paid what they could, often in installments or through barter. Some weeks, the income barely covered the workshop's rent and Diego's school supplies. But Lawrence measured success differently than most. His late wife Carmen had taught him that true wealth lay in the moments when someone realized that their limitation wasn't permanent, that with the right approach, almost anything was possible. The morning's first customer was already waiting when Lawrence unlocked the workshop door. Elena Vasquez clutched a crumpled piece of paper with sketches of what looked like a modified desk. Her 7-year-old daughter, Rosa, had been struggling in school ever since a birth defect left her with limited fine motor control. The standard school desks were impossible for Rosa to use comfortably, and the family couldn't afford the specialized furniture recommended by her occupational therapist. "I know it's probably too expensive," Elena began hesitantly, "but Rosa's teacher said you might be able to help." Lawrence knelt to Rosa's eye level, studying not the sketches, but the girl herself, how she held her pencil, the way her shoulder compensated for her arm's limitations, the determination in her eyes that reminded him so much of Carmen's young patience. Within minutes, he was already redesigning the concept in his mind, seeing solutions that the original sketches had missed. "We'll make it work," he told Elena simply, the same words he'd spoken to countless families over the years. Not "we'll try," or "maybe," just the quiet confidence of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve with enough patience and creativity. This was the thing about Lawrence's work that set him apart from conventional carpentry. Every project required him to become part engineer, part therapist, part detective. He studied anatomy texts to understand how different conditions affected movement. He collaborated with physical therapists, occupational specialists, and sometimes even veterinarians when their animal mobility solutions offered insights for human applications. His approach had evolved over the years, shaped by Carmen's influence and refined through countless successes and failures. She had taught him to see beyond the disability to the person beneath, to understand that adaptive equipment should enhance someone's abilities rather than highlight their limitations. "Designed for dignity, Lawrence," she would say while reviewing his sketches. "Make them forget they're using something special. Make them just feel capable." The workshop's phone rang constantly these days. Word had spread through social media about Lawrence's work, and requests came from across the state. But he remained selective, choosing projects based on need rather than profit potential. A wealthy family from the city had offered him $50,000 to create a luxury adaptive playroom, but Lawrence had turned them down to focus on helping 3 different families from his own community who couldn't afford basic mobility aids.
As Elena left with measurements for Rosa's custom desk, Lawrence returned to his workbench, where a partially completed project waited, a prototype that had been consuming his thoughts for weeks. It was more ambitious than anything he'd attempted before, a lightweight exoskeleton frame made entirely from laminated wood and precision-crafted joints. He'd been inspired by an article about bamboo's strength-to-weight ratio and had been experimenting with different wood combinations that might provide similar properties. The project had started as pure curiosity, but Lawrence sensed it might be important someday. He learned to trust these intuitions. They had led him to some of his most successful innovations. Carmen used to joke that he could smell a breakthrough coming like rain in the distance. As he traced the elegant curves of the wooden frame, Lawrence had no way of knowing that his intuition was about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. Somewhere across town, a desperate mother was making phone calls, and his name had just moved to the top of her list. The afternoon sun streamed through the workshop windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced around his workbench like possibilities waiting to take shape. Lawrence picked up his favorite chisel, feeling its familiar weight, and got back to work. Another day of building dreams was beginning, and he had no idea how much his world was about to change.
Victoria Cooper sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, staring at the thick medical folder that had consumed her life for the past 6 months. The manila file, now expanded into 3 separate binders, documented every desperate attempt to restore her daughter's mobility. Each report was a dead end dressed in professional language, each specialist consultation another door closing on hope. She pulled out the most recent evaluation from the renowned Clearwater Rehabilitation Institute, its letterhead as pristine as the devastating news it contained. Dr. Amanda Richardson, one of the country's leading spinal cord specialists, had been their 43rd consultation. Victoria had flown Messi to Seattle for a week of comprehensive testing, spending $60,000 on experimental diagnostics that promised to reveal previously undetected possibilities. The results had been achingly familiar. Complete L1 spinal cord injury with no viable neural pathways remaining below the point of damage. "I'm sorry, Miss Cooper," Dr. Richardson had said, her voice carrying the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered life-altering news daily. "We've exhausted every conventional treatment option. At this point, our focus should shift to maximizing quality of life within the constraints of Messi's condition." Constraints. The word had haunted Victoria for months. She'd built Cooper Dynamics by refusing to accept constraints, by finding innovative solutions when others saw only obstacles. Her company had revolutionized supply chain management precisely because she never accepted that's just how things work. But medical reality, it seemed, operated by different rules. The accident replayed in her mind for the 1000th time. Alpine Ridge Resort, the exclusive ski destination where she'd taken Messi for their annual mother-daughter weekend. Messi had been fearless on the slopes, naturally athletic, with the kind of graceful confidence that made other parents stop and watch. She'd been attempting a jump she'd successfully completed dozens of times when the collision occurred. The other skier, a teenager who'd lost control at the top of the run, had crashed into Messi at the worst possible angle. Victoria could still hear the sickening sound of the impact, still see Messi's motionless form lying in the snow. The helicopter ride to Denver General was the longest 23 minutes of Victoria's life, watching her daughter's face, praying for any sign of movement below her waist. The months that followed had become a blur of medical procedures, rehabilitation attempts, and gradually dimming hope. Victoria had approached Messi's recovery with the same systematic determination she brought to business challenges. She created spreadsheets tracking treatment outcomes, hired medical consultants to analyze data, and maintained detailed logs of every therapy session. The first 3 months had been spent at the Hawkins Spinal Rehabilitation Center in Colorado, where Messi underwent intensive physical therapy. The facility was renowned for its innovative approaches and boasted success stories that had given Victoria initial hope. But week after week, the reports remained the same. No improvement in sensation or voluntary movement below the injury site. From there, they'd traveled to the Brooks Institute in Switzerland, where stem cell therapy promised miraculous recoveries. Victoria paid for the experimental treatment without hesitation. $200,000 for a month-long program that ultimately showed no results. The Swiss doctors were kind but honest. Messi's injury was too severe for their current regenerative techniques. Next came the robotics programs. The Cyberdyne facility in Japan offered robotic exoskeletons that could simulate walking movements, potentially encouraging neural pathway regeneration. Messi spent 6 weeks training with their HAL system, mechanically moving her legs through walking motions while sophisticated sensors monitored any neural activity. The technology was impressive, but Messi remained completely dependent on the machine for any movement. Victoria had consulted with experimental programs at Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and UCLA. She'd investigated controversial treatments in Mexico, cutting-edge therapies in Germany, and even traditional healing approaches in Thailand. Each journey had cost tens of thousands of dollars and produced the same devastating result: no improvement. The financial cost was manageable. Cooper Dynamics generated enough revenue to fund any treatment, regardless of price. But the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Victoria watched her vibrant, athletic daughter retreat further into herself with each failed attempt. Messi, who had once filled their home with laughter and constant motion, now spent hours staring out windows with a stillness that broke Victoria's heart. The hardest part wasn't the medical appointments or the travel. It was watching Messi try to protect her mother's feelings by pretending to be okay. Last week, Victoria had overheard a phone conversation between Messi and her best friend, Chloe.
Phone conversation between Messi and her best friend, Chloe. "Mom keeps looking for miracles," Messi had whispered, her voice barely audible through the bedroom door. "I think she's spending all her money trying to fix me. Maybe I should tell her to stop. Maybe it's time to just accept this." The words had struck Victoria like physical blows. Her daughter, her beautiful, brave girl, was giving up hope to spare her mother's feelings. That night, Victoria had stood in Messi's doorway watching her sleep, seeing how her daughter's legs lay motionless beneath the covers, no longer the restless limbs that used to kick off blankets and move constantly, even in dreams. The business world Victoria had mastered suddenly felt meaningless. What good was being featured on Forbes magazine covers when she couldn't solve the problem that mattered most? Her company's stock price hit record highs while her daughter learned to navigate the world from a wheelchair. The irony was cruel. Victoria Cooper could optimize global supply chains, but couldn't restore her daughter's ability to walk to the kitchen. Yesterday's consultation with Dr. Marcus Webb at the renowned Titan Medical Center had been intended as their final attempt. Dr. Webb specialized in impossible cases, working with patients other specialists had given up on. Victoria had hoped his fresh perspective might reveal something others had missed. Instead, he'd simply confirmed what they already knew. "Miss Cooper," he said, reviewing Messi's extensive medical history, "I understand your determination and I admire your unwillingness to give up. But at some point, continued searching for a cure can prevent acceptance of what is. Messi needs to focus on building a meaningful life within her current capabilities." Victoria had left that appointment feeling utterly defeated for the first time in her professional life. She'd returned to her office, closed the door, and allowed herself to cry for the first time since the accident. 43 specialists, 18 different treatment facilities, $2 million, and 6 months of relentless effort had led to the same conclusion: her daughter would never walk again. That evening, she'd begun making preparations to transform their home for permanent wheelchair accessibility. The beautiful spiral staircase that Messi used to raise up and down would need to be replaced with an elevator. The second-floor bedrooms would be relocated to the main level. Swimming pool access would require extensive modifications. Each architectural change felt like another small death, another acknowledgement that Messi's old life was truly over. Victoria signed the contractor agreements with trembling hands, officially accepting the reality she'd fought against for 6 months. But as she prepared to close Messi's medical file forever, her assistant knocked on her office door. Rebecca had worked for Victoria for 8 years, and she knew better than to interrupt during these difficult moments unless something was truly important. "I'm sorry to bother you, Miss Cooper," Rebecca said hesitantly, "but my sister mentioned something that might interest you. There's apparently a carpenter here in Riverside Heights who's been helping people with mobility issues. I know it sounds unconventional, but some of the things he's created are remarkable." Victoria almost dismissed the suggestion immediately. What good was a local carpenter possibly offer that the world's leading medical institutions couldn't? But something in Rebecca's voice stopped her. Maybe it was the genuine hope there, or maybe Victoria simply wasn't ready to give up entirely. She found herself asking for the man's name and address, promising herself she'd just drive by his workshop to see for herself. After all, she had nothing left to lose except the last fragments of hope itself. The contrast was jarring. Victoria's Bentley Continental pulled slowly into the gravel parking lot of Gomez Custom Woodworks, its pristine paint and chrome accents looking almost alien next to the weathered pickup trucks and practical sedans that typically occupied the space. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes, air conditioning humming softly,
studying the modest workshop through her tinted windows. This wasn't what she had expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. The building itself was unremarkable, a converted auto garage with large bay doors, probably built in the 1970s. Hand-painted wooden signs advertised custom furniture and specialty woodworking, their lettering showing the careful craftsmanship of someone who took pride in details. Potted plants lined the entrance, and a small herb garden grew along one wall, suggesting someone who cared about making even utilitarian spaces beautiful. What caught her attention were the pieces displayed in the workshop's windows. These weren't typical furniture showroom items. A curved ramp with intricate railings that looked more like sculpture than accessibility equipment. An adjustable desk with elegant lines that somehow made its adaptive features seem natural rather than clinical. A child's wheelchair that had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, complete with carved wooden details that made it seem magical rather than medical. "Maybe we should just go home, Mom," Messi said quietly from the back seat. She'd been reluctant to come, having endured too many consultations that ended in disappointment. "This seems really different from the other places." Victoria turned to study her daughter's face in the rearview mirror. Messi sat in her custom wheelchair, a $30,000 marvel of carbon fiber and electronic controls that had been fitted specifically for her measurements. It was undeniably the most advanced mobility device money could buy, but Victoria suddenly saw it through different eyes. Despite all its technology, it looked cold, clinical, like a medical device, rather than something that could truly be part of a 12-year-old girl's life.
"We're already here," Victoria said, though her own confidence was wavering. 5 minutes. If it doesn't feel right, we leave." The workshop door chimed with an old-fashioned bell as Victoria pushed Messi's wheelchair inside. The interior was a revelation, nothing like the sterile medical facilities they'd grown accustomed to visiting. Sunlight streamed through skylights, illuminating a space that felt more like an artist's studio than a carpenter's shop. The smell of wood shavings and natural oils created an atmosphere of warmth and creativity. But it was the walls that truly captured Victoria's attention. Dozens of photographs showed people of all ages using custom-built adaptive equipment, but these weren't the posed, clinical shots typical of medical brochures. These were candid moments of joy. An elderly man tending his garden with specially designed tools, his face bright with satisfaction. Twin girls with cerebral palsy playing on adapted playground equipment, their laughter almost audible in the still image. A teenage boy painting at an easel that had been modified for his limited arm mobility, his artwork proudly displayed beside the photo. Each image told a story of problems solved not through high-tech solutions, but through careful attention to human needs. Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a flutter of genuine curiosity rather than desperate hope.
"You must be Ms. Cooper." Lawrence emerged from behind a partially completed project,
wiping his hands on a cloth. His appearance was exactly what Victoria had expected from a small-town carpenter. Work clothes, calloused hands, the kind of practical bearing that spoke of decades spent solving problems with tools and patience. What surprised her were his eyes. They held the same analytical intelligence she recognized in successful engineers and designers. "I am, and this is my daughter, Messi." Lawrence immediately shifted his attention to Messi, something that hadn't happened in most of their medical consultations. Rather than discussing her condition with Victoria, he knelt to Messi's eye level, studying not her wheelchair, but her face, her posture, the way she held herself.
"That's some impressive technology you're working with," Lawrence said, gesturing to the wheelchair.
His tone held genuine appreciation rather than the patronizing sweetness they'd encountered from some medical professionals. "It cost more than most cars," Messi admitted, a hint of her old personality flickering through. "But it doesn't make me feel normal."
Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "Technology's funny that way. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the most human one. He stood and gestured around his workshop. Everything I build here starts with a simple question, not what's technically possible, but what would make someone's life feel more like their own. Victoria found herself reassessing the man in front of her. This wasn't the simple craftsman she had expected. His vocabulary suggested engineering training, and his approach demonstrated a philosophical sophistication that reminded her of the best product designers she'd worked with in the tech industry. "I've been researching your daughter's condition," Lawrence continued, pulling out a folder that surprised Victoria with its thickness. L1 complete spinal cord injury occurred during skiing accident approximately 6 months ago. I've read about your consultations with the major rehabilitation centers. Victoria's professional armor cracked slightly. "You've done your homework." "I always do." Lawrence opened the folder, revealing not just printed medical articles, but hand-drawn sketches, calculations, and what appeared to be engineering diagrams. The thing about spinal cord injuries is that the medical establishment approaches them from a deficit perspective, focusing on what's been lost. But from an engineering standpoint, the question is different. How do we amplify what still remains? He moved to his workbench, where Victoria could see the wooden exoskeleton prototype she'd noticed through the window. Up close, it was even more remarkable. Organic curves that seemed to flow like natural growth, joints that moved with mechanical precision but maintained the warmth of handcrafted wood. Traditional exoskeletons try to replace human movement. They're basically robots that a person sits inside. But what if we approached it differently? What if, instead of replacing movement, we amplified the movement that's still there? Messi wheeled herself closer to the workbench, her interest clearly captured for the first time in months. "What do you mean, amplify?" Lawrence smiled at her direct question. "Every spinal cord injury is different, even when doctors use the same terms. Complete injury doesn't necessarily mean zero neural activity. It often means the signals are too weak to generate visible movement. But weak signals can be amplified." He demonstrated with a small mechanism on his bench, a delicate joint that moved in response to the slightest pressure. "See this? It takes a force of less than 1 ounce to initiate movement, but it can support over 100 pounds once activated. The technology isn't complicated, it's just precisely calibrated." Victoria found herself leaning forward, her business instincts recognizing genuine innovation. The medical robotics companies we've worked with, they never mentioned anything like this approach. Because they're thinking like medical device manufacturers. They want to create products that work for the largest possible market. I'm thinking like a craftsman. How do we create something that works perfectly for one specific person? The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, who bounded through the workshop's side entrance with the energy of someone completely at home in the space.
"Dad, Mrs. Vasquez called. Rosa loves her new desk," the boy announced before noticing the visitors. He stopped short, suddenly shy, but his curiosity quickly overcame his reserve as he spotted Messi's high-tech wheelchair. "Diego, come meet our visitors," Lawrence said warmly. "This is Miss Cooper and her daughter, Messi." Diego approached with the unguarded friendliness of childhood, immediately focusing on the wheelchair's electronic controls. "Whoa, that's like a robot. Can you make it go really fast?" For the first time in months, Messi actually laughed. Not the polite responses she'd perfected for well-meaning adults, but genuine amusement at Diego's enthusiasm. "Pretty fast," she admitted, demonstrating the wheelchair's smooth acceleration around the workshop floor. Diego followed alongside, peppering her with questions about its capabilities, while Lawrence watched with quiet satisfaction. Victoria observed the interaction with growing amazement. In 5 minutes, this carpenter's son had accomplished something that months of professional counseling hadn't. He'd made Messi smile genuinely,
treating her wheelchair as something cool rather than something tragic. "Your son is remarkable," Victoria told Lawrence quietly. "He learned early that different doesn't mean broken. In this workshop, we celebrate what makes each person unique rather than trying to make everyone the same." As Victoria watched her daughter explain her wheelchair's features to an 8-year-old boy who thought it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen, she felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't seeing Messi as a problem to be solved or a tragedy to be managed. She was seeing her daughter as a person with extraordinary capabilities, even if those capabilities needed new ways to be expressed.
Messi watched the screen with growing fascination as subtle waves appeared and disappeared across the display. "Those are my muscles?" "Those are your muscles trying to respond to your brain's commands," Lawrence corrected. "Now close your eyes again and imagine standing up. Really visualize it. Feel the process in your mind." As Messi concentrated, the patterns on the screen began to change. Tiny spikes appeared in certain channels, barely perceptible fluctuations that would be invisible to normal observation. But the sensors caught them, translating Messi's mental commands into measurable electrical activity. Victoria found herself holding her breath as she watched the display. After months of medical consultations that showed nothing but devastating absence, here was proof that her daughter's body was still fighting, still trying to respond. "Those signals," Lawrence said, pointing to the screen, "are what we're going to work with. They're weak, probably less than 5% of normal muscle activation, but they're consistent and they're intentional." He moved to his workbench and picked up a small mechanical device that looked like a miniature version of the wooden exoskeleton frame. When he attached it to his own arm and flexed his bicep, the device moved smoothly, amplifying his muscle movement into a larger motion. "This is the principle," Lawrence explained. "We're not trying to replace your movement, Messi. We're going to amplify the movement you still have. Those tiny electrical signals your muscles are generating, we can use them to trigger mechanical assistance that will translate your intentions into physical action." Victoria's analytical mind was racing. "You're talking about a neural interface system. Those exist at research institutions. I've seen demonstrations at MIT and Stanford, but they're experimental, incredibly complex, and cost millions of dollars. The expensive systems try to read brain signals directly. That requires surgical implants and supercomputers to process the data. I'm taking a different approach, reading the residual muscle signals that are already accessible and using mechanical amplification rather than electronic replacement." He gestured to his wooden exoskeleton prototype. "Wood might seem primitive, but it has properties that make it perfect for this application. It's lightweight, naturally flexible, and can be precisely shaped to match human movement patterns. Combined with the right mechanical systems, it can provide the amplification we need without the complexity of full electronic control." Messi was still watching the sensor display, amazed by the proof that her brain's commands were reaching her muscles, even if they couldn't produce visible movement. "So this would let me control it myself? Not like those robot suits where the machine does everything." "Exactly." Lawrence's enthusiasm was infectious. "You would be in complete control. The system would just amplify your existing signals into movements strong enough to support your weight and create mobility. It would be your strength, your balance, your decisions, just enhanced." Victoria found herself caught between hope and skepticism. "How long would something like this take to develop? And what's your success rate with projects of this complexity?" Lawrence was quiet for a moment, and Victoria recognized the look of someone making a commitment they weren't entirely sure they could keep. "I've never built anything exactly like this before," he admitted, "but I've been working toward it for months, and Dr. Winters believes the approach is sound."
He moved to a wall where detailed engineering drawings were pinned alongside medical diagrams and biomechanical studies. The individual components aren't revolutionary. EMG sensors, mechanical amplification systems, lightweight structural materials. The innovation is in how they're integrated and customized for one specific person. Diego, who had been quietly playing with wood scraps in a corner, suddenly spoke up. "Dad's really good at making impossible things work. He built me a treehouse that looks like it's floating, and everyone said that was impossible too." The simple confidence in the 8-year-old's voice carried more weight than any technical specification could have. Victoria looked at her daughter, seeing something in Messi's expression that had been absent for months: genuine excitement about a possibility. "How would it work?" Messi asked. "I mean, the actual process of using it." Lawrence knelt beside her wheelchair again, his explanation becoming more animated. "You'd wear the exoskeleton like a second skeleton, lightweight supports that follow your body's natural lines. When you think about standing up, your muscles generate those tiny signals we just measured. The system detects those signals and provides mechanical assistance proportional to your intention." He demonstrated with his hands, showing how small movements could trigger larger mechanical responses. If you want to take a step forward, you think about stepping forward just like you always did. Your muscles fire those weak signals, the system detects your intention, and provides the mechanical power to actually move your leg forward. But the timing, the direction, the speed, all of that comes from you. Victoria watched her daughter's face transform as the implications sunk in. This wasn't about miraculous healing or impossible medical breakthroughs. This was about amplifying what Messi still had, honoring her existing capabilities rather than trying to replace them entirely. "There's something else," Lawrence continued, his voice dropping to the tone of someone sharing a profound truth. "Dr. Winters believes that by providing feedback to your nervous system, actually feeling the movement happen in response to your commands, we might encourage new neural pathway development. Not healing exactly, but adaptation."
The workshop had grown quiet, except for the distant sound of Diego's play and the soft hum of the electronic equipment. Victoria found herself facing a moment that would define not just Messi's future, but their entire family's relationship with hope itself. "Mr. Gomez," she said carefully, "are you telling me you believe you can help my daughter walk again?" Lawrence met her eyes directly, and Victoria saw in them the same unwavering determination that had built her business empire. "Miss Cooper, I'm not promising miracles, but I am promising that we're going to find out exactly what's possible when we stop focusing on what's been lost and start amplifying what remains." He turned to Messi, including her in the decision that would reshape her life. "The question isn't whether I can make you walk again. The question is whether you're ready to discover what your body can still do when we give it the right tools." Messi looked at the sensor display still showing her muscle activity, then at the elegant wooden exoskeleton waiting to be customized for her specific needs, then at her mother's face where hope and fear warred openly. "When do we start?" she asked. And in that moment, the impossible became possible. Word spread through Riverside Heights like morning mist across the valley. Within 48 hours of Victoria and Messi's first visit to Lawrence's workshop, the project had taken on a life of its own. It started with Dr. Patricia Winters stopping by during her lunch break, ostensibly to check on Lawrence's sensor calibrations, but really to meet the young girl whose case had captured both their imaginations. "The EMG readings are remarkable," Dr. Winters told Victoria privately, while Lawrence worked with Messi on baseline measurements. "In 15 years of neurology practice, I've rarely seen such consistent residual activity in a complete L1 injury. Your daughter's nervous system is fighting harder than most patients I've encountered." The validation from a respected medical professional seemed to unlock something in the community. By the end of the week, Lawrence's workshop had become an unlikely hub of activity.
Tom Martinez, the owner of Martinez Precision Machining, arrived Thursday morning with a box of custom aluminum joints he'd fabricated based on Lawrence's sketches. "No charge," Tom insisted when Lawrence tried to discuss payment. "My nephew Roberto was born with spina bifida. If there's even a chance this could help kids like him someday, consider it my investment in the future." The gesture was the first of many. News of the project had reached the Riverside Heights Community Facebook group, where Rebecca Martinez, Tom's wife and Victoria's assistant, had shared a carefully worded post about Lawrence's innovative approach to mobility assistance. The response had been overwhelming. Elena Vasquez arrived Friday afternoon with her daughter Rosa, the 7-year-old who now proudly used the adaptive desk Lawrence had built for her. Rosa wanted to help, Elena explained, as her daughter shyly approached Messi with a hand-drawn picture of a girl with wings attached to her legs. She said maybe the nice girl could learn to fly like she does with her special desk. The innocence of the gesture moved Victoria in ways she hadn't expected. Rosa's drawing, created at her perfectly fitted desk, showed not disability overcome, but capability celebrated. It was exactly the perspective Lawrence had been advocating, focusing on what was possible rather than what was lost. Saturday brought an unexpected visitor, Marcus Chen, the head of engineering at Riverside Technical College. He'd heard about the project from Dr. Winters and arrived with 3 of his most talented senior students, including Jessica Park, who was completing her thesis on biomedical engineering applications. "We'd like to volunteer our services," Marcus announced, his students nodding eagerly behind him. "This project represents exactly the kind of innovation we try to teach, practical solutions to real human problems. If you'll have us, we'd consider it an honor to participate." Lawrence found himself orchestrating a collaboration he'd never imagined. The engineering students brought CAD software and 3D modeling capabilities that could refine his hand-drawn designs. Jessica Park's thesis research on neural interface systems complemented his mechanical approach perfectly, and her access to the college's materials testing lab would allow them to verify the strength and safety of every component. But it wasn't just technical expertise that flowed toward the project. Margaret Sullivan, an 80-year-old retired seamstress who lived 2 blocks from the workshop, stopped by on Sunday with fabric samples and measuring tools. "If the young lady is going to wear this contraption," Margaret declared with gentle authority, "it needs to be comfortable and dignified. I've been making adaptive clothing for my arthritis support group for years. Let me help with the interface design." Her offer revealed an aspect of the project Lawrence hadn't fully considered. The exoskeleton would need to integrate seamlessly with Messi's daily life, not just function mechanically. Margaret's experience creating beautiful, dignified, adaptive clothing could ensure that the final device enhanced rather than hindered Messi's sense of self. Diego became the project's unofficial ambassador, his 8-year-old enthusiasm breaking down barriers between the growing team of adults. He appointed himself Messi's guide to the workshop, showing her the best spots to observe different processes and translating adult technical discussions into concepts a 12-year-old could follow. "My dad says the wood has to learn to bend exactly right for your legs. Like how I had to learn to hit baseballs just right. Except the wood has to be perfect the first time." The analogy was remarkably apt, and Lawrence found himself using variations of Diego's simple explanations when discussing the project with other community members. The boy had an intuitive understanding of the work that sometimes cut through technical complexity to reach essential truths. Victoria watched this growing coalition with a mixture of amazement and concern. Her business instincts appreciated the efficiency of distributed expertise, each participant contributing their specific skills to solve pieces of the larger puzzle. But she was also acutely aware that Messi had become the center of a community effort, with all the pressure and expectation that entailed. "How do you feel about all this attention?" Victoria asked her daughter during a quiet moment while the adults discussed materials procurement strategies. Messi considered the question seriously, watching Margaret measure fabric samples while Tom Martinez explained aluminum alloy properties to Jessica Park. "At the hospitals,
I always felt like a problem to be solved," she said finally. "Here, I feel like part of the solution." The distinction was profound, and Victoria realized it captured something essential about Lawrence's approach. Rather than positioning Messi as a passive recipient of treatment, he'd made her an active participant in creating her own mobility solution. Every decision about the exoskeleton's design involved her input. Every modification required her approval. By the project's second week, Lawrence had established a systematic approach to the collaboration. Morning hours were reserved for Messi's individual sessions, sensor calibration, movement analysis, and custom fitting work that required her undivided attention. Afternoons became community workshop time, when various team members would arrive to contribute their specific expertise. The engineering students created precise 3D models of each component, allowing Lawrence to test design modifications virtually before committing materials to construction. Tom Martinez's machine shop produced prototype parts for testing, while Margaret worked on the comfort and wearability aspects that would make daily use practical. Dr. Winters established a regular schedule of medical consultations, ensuring that every aspect of the project met safety standards and contributed positively to Messi's overall health. Her presence lent credibility to the effort and helped navigate occasional concerns from other medical professionals who heard about the unconventional treatment approach. The project's growing complexity required new organizational systems. Victoria found herself naturally taking on project management responsibilities, creating timelines and coordinating between different team members. Her business skills proved invaluable in keeping the collaborative effort focused and efficient. "You know what's remarkable about this?" Jessica Park commented during a Thursday afternoon fitting session. She'd been documenting the project for her thesis and had noticed patterns that weren't immediately obvious to other participants. Usually, medical device development is done by engineers and then presented to patients. Here, the patient is driving the engineering process. Lawrence nodded, adjusting a joint mechanism while Messi provided feedback on comfort and range of motion. "That's because we're not building a device. We're building Messi's specific solution. Every person's body is different. Every person's goals are different. The technology has to adapt to the human, not the other way around." The workshop had been transformed to accommodate the project's needs. Wall space that once displayed finished furniture pieces now showed engineering drawings, material specifications, and progress photographs documenting each stage of development. A dedicated area had been set up for electronics testing, while another corner housed Margaret's growing collection of comfort interface prototypes. But perhaps the most significant change was less tangible. The space had become infused with a sense of shared purpose that transcended individual contributions. Everyone involved understood they were participating in something larger than a single-family struggle with disability. They were pioneering a new approach to human-centered adaptive technology. As the third week began, Lawrence stood in his transformed workshop, surveying the organized chaos of collaborative innovation. Messi worked with Jessica Park on sensor placement optimization, while Diego helped Margaret sort fabric samples by comfort ratings. Tom Martinez discussed joint tolerances with Dr. Winters, while Victoria coordinated delivery schedules for specialized materials. This wasn't just building an exoskeleton anymore. This was proving that the most complex problems could be solved when communities committed to supporting individual dreams. In helping Messi learn to walk again, they were all discovering new ways to move forward together. The first prototype looked nothing like Lawrence had envisioned. 3 weeks of careful planning, precise measurements, and collaborative engineering had produced a device that was technically sound but practically impossible. The wooden framework, beautiful in its craftsmanship, was too rigid. The mechanical joints, precisely machined by Tom Martinez, created a walking motion that resembled a marionette more than natural human movement. "It's okay," Messi said bravely, though Lawrence could see the disappointment in her eyes as she attempted to use the device for the first time. The exoskeleton supported her weight adequately, and the EMG sensors correctly detected her muscle signals, but the resulting movement was jerky, uncomfortable, and utterly unnatural. "Maybe we just need to adjust it more." Lawrence helped her out of the prototype, his jaw tight with frustration. Every calculation had been perfect, every component had tested successfully in isolation, but the integrated system failed to capture the fluid grace that made human movement beautiful. The device worked exactly as designed, And that was the problem. Dr. Winters reviewed the session video that evening, her clinical experience providing context for Lawrence's disappointment. "The mechanical function is impressive," she noted, freezing the frame at the moment Messi took her first assisted step. "But human gait involves thousands of micro-adjustments per second. Your current system can't respond quickly enough to accommodate those subtle variations." The engineering students from Riverside Technical College had documented every aspect of the failed test, their data revealing the scope of the challenge they faced. Jessica Park's analysis was particularly sobering. "We're trying to replicate a biological system that evolved over millions of years, using mechanical components that can only approximate organic movement patterns." But it wasn't just technical problems that plagued the project. By the fourth week, the initial community enthusiasm had begun to fracture under the weight of complexity and slow progress. Some volunteers started arriving less frequently, their early excitement tempered by the grinding reality of iterative engineering. Margaret Sullivan, despite her best efforts, struggled to create interface padding that could accommodate the prototype's rigid structure while remaining comfortable for extended wear. "I can make it comfortable for sitting or standing," she admitted during a frustrating fitting session. "But when it moves, the pressure points shift in ways I can't predict." The electronics integration presented its own cascade of problems. The EMG sensors, while accurate, proved extraordinarily sensitive to external interference. Fluorescent lights in the workshop created signal noise that confused the system's response algorithms. Even Diego walking too close to the testing area while wearing his sneakers, which built up static electricity, could trigger unwanted mechanical responses. Tom Martinez discovered that his precisely machined joints, while mechanically perfect, generated vibrations that interfered with the sensor readings. "It's like trying to listen to whispers next to a construction site," he explained to the increasingly frustrated team. "The mechanical noise from the actuators drown out the biological signals we're trying to detect." Victoria watched these setbacks with growing alarm, not because of the technical challenges. Her business experience had taught her that innovation required iteration, but because of their effect on Messi. Her daughter had thrown herself into the project with enthusiasm that reminded Victoria of the girl she'd been before the accident. Now, as each test session ended in disappointment, Victoria saw familiar shadows returning to Messi's eyes. "Maybe the doctors were right," Messi said quietly after a particularly frustrating morning session. The prototype had malfunctioned during a simple standing exercise, causing her to lose balance and require Diego's quick assistance to avoid falling. The comment hit Lawrence like a physical blow. He'd seen that same resignation in too many faces over the years, the moment when hope transforms into acceptance of limitation. But this time felt different. This time, he'd made promises he wasn't certain he could keep to a 12-year-old girl who deserved better than another disappointment. That evening, Lawrence sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by components that worked individually but failed collectively. The wooden framework that had seemed so elegant in design looked awkward and bulky in reality. The sophisticated electronics that had impressed everyone during demonstrations couldn't handle the complexity of real-world application. Diego found his father there at nearly midnight, head in his hands among the scattered pieces of their ambitious failure. "Is it broken forever?" Diego asked, settling beside his father on the workshop floor. "I don't know," Lawrence admitted, an honesty he couldn't share with the adult team members who were counting on his expertise. "I thought I understood how to make it work, but human movement is more complicated than I realized." Diego studied the prototype with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Maybe you're trying to make it too much like people walking. When I learned to ride my bike, I didn't try to make it walk like my legs do. I had to learn bike walking." The simple observation from his 8-year-old son struck Lawrence with unexpected force.
He'd been trying to replicate normal human gait rather than creating a new form of movement that leveraged the exoskeleton's unique capabilities. The device didn't need to make Messi walk exactly like she had before the accident. It needed to help her discover a new way of moving that was authentically hers. The realization led to 3 sleepless nights of redesign. Lawrence scrapped the rigid framework in favor of a more flexible approach that allowed for organic adaptation to Messi's movements. Instead of trying to impose a predetermined gait pattern, the new design would learn from her body's natural responses and adapt accordingly. But implementing the new approach required starting over with many components. The community team, already strained by weeks of slow progress, faced the prospect of abandoning work they'd invested significant time and effort in creating. "I understand if people want to step back," Lawrence told the group during an emergency meeting he'd called to explain the design changes. "This is more complex than any of us anticipated, and I can't guarantee the new approach will work better than what we've tried." The workshop fell silent as team members processed the implications. Weeks of careful work would need to be discarded. The timeline they'd optimistically projected would need to be extended indefinitely. The project that had begun with such confidence now faced an uncertain future. Jessica Park was the first to speak. "My thesis advisor warned me that the most interesting research happens when your initial assumptions prove wrong. This adaptive approach is actually more innovative than what we started with."
Roberto Martinez stood up in the front row, his young voice carrying clearly despite his nervousness. "Messi, will this work for someone like me too?" Messi approached the edge of the demonstration area, still wearing her exoskeleton, and knelt to Roberto's eye level. "Roberto, this specific system was built just for me, customized for my exact situation. But the principles, the idea that technology should learn from you and grow with you, those principles can work for anyone. Mr. Gomez isn't just building one device. He's proving a whole new way of thinking about what's possible." As the formal demonstration concluded and audience members began approaching for individual conversations, Lawrence felt something he hadn't experienced since his father had first placed the family toolbox in his hands: the profound satisfaction of using his skills to change what someone believed was possible. The Mark II learning framework represented more than technological achievement. It embodied a philosophy that human limitation was often simply a matter of not yet having the right tools, the right support, or the right community commitment to transformation. In helping Messi learn to walk again, they had all learned to move forward together. The phone calls began within hours of the demonstration video going viral. By Monday morning, 3 days after Messi's triumph at the community center, Lawrence's workshop phone was ringing every 15 minutes, with requests from families, medical institutions, and technology companies around the world. Dr. James Mitchell from Stanford's bioengineering department, Victoria announced, reading from a list of messages that had accumulated over the weekend. The director of rehabilitation at Johns Hopkins, someone from the Gates Foundation, and 43 individual families from 6 different countries. Lawrence sat at his workbench, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his quiet carpenter's shop into an international focal point for adaptive technology innovation. The workshop that had once served a few dozen local clients was now receiving inquiries about revolutionizing mobility assistance for millions of people worldwide. Jessica Park had taken a leave of absence from her graduate program to help manage the influx of interest. Her thesis advisor had enthusiastically approved the decision, recognizing that she was no longer just studying adaptive technology, she was helping to invent its future. "The MIT team wants to license our learning algorithms for their robotic prosthetics program," she reported, scrolling through emails on her laptop. "The European Space Agency is interested in adapting our framework for astronaut mobility in low-gravity environments. And there's a rehabilitation hospital in Tokyo that wants to send a team here to observe our methods." But it wasn't just academic and medical institutions that were responding. The most profound ripple effects were happening in the lives of individuals who had seen Messi's demonstration and recognized their own possibilities reflected in her movement. Roberto Martinez had been the first. Within a week of the demonstration, Tom had brought his nephew to the workshop for a consultation. Roberto's spina bifida presented different challenges than Messi's spinal cord injury, but the principles of the learning framework could be adapted to amplify his existing capabilities
rather than trying to replace what was missing. The beauty of the adaptive approach, Lawrence explained to Roberto's parents while the boy explored the workshop with Diego, is that it doesn't require the same condition to work. It just requires the willingness to let the technology learn from the person rather than forcing the person to learn the technology. Dr. Winters had begun documenting the broader applications systematically. Working with Lawrence and Jessica, she was developing protocols for applying the learning framework principles to different types of mobility impairments: cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, stroke recovery, and traumatic brain injury. Each condition presents unique patterns of residual capability, she explained to a visiting delegation from the National Institutes of Health. The revolutionary aspect of Lawrence's approach is that it honors those unique patterns rather than trying to override them with standardized responses. The workshop itself had undergone another transformation. Victoria had quietly purchased the adjacent building and hired contractors to create a proper research and development facility while maintaining the workshop's original character. The expansion included consultation rooms for individual assessments, a materials testing lab, and a manufacturing area where multiple learning framework systems could be produced simultaneously. Margaret Sullivan found herself leading a team of adaptive clothing designers who were working to create interface systems for different body types and conditions. Her expertise in dignity-preserving adaptive wear had become essential as they scaled the technology to serve diverse populations. Each person needs to feel like themselves when they're using the system, Margaret explained to a group of fashion design students who had volunteered to help with the project. Technology should enhance someone's identity, not define it. But perhaps the most significant ripple effect was happening in the medical community itself. The traditional approach to spinal cord injury treatment was being challenged by professionals who had witnessed Messi's demonstration. Dr. Amanda Richardson, the specialist who had delivered Messi's original "no recovery possible" diagnosis, requested a meeting with Lawrence and Dr. Winters. Her willingness to examine her assumptions represented a broader shift happening across rehabilitation medicine. "I've been treating spinal cord injury for 20 years, Dr. Richardson admitted during their consultation at Riverside General. "I was trained to focus on what's lost and help patients adapt to that loss. Your approach forces us to ask a different question. What if we focused on amplifying what remains instead?" The conversation led to a collaboration between Lawrence's workshop and 3 major rehabilitation hospitals, creating a research network dedicated to developing personalized adaptive technologies. Each institution would contribute their clinical expertise while learning Lawrence's individualized approach to human-machine interface design. International attention brought unexpected challenges. A German medical device company offered to purchase the learning framework technology for $50 million, promising to develop mass-market versions that could help thousands of people. Lawrence spent sleepless nights weighing the potential impact against his core philosophy of individualized solutions. "Mass production assumes that people with similar conditions have similar needs," he explained to Victoria during one of their evening planning sessions. "But that's exactly the assumption we've been proving wrong." They decided to pursue a different path, licensing the principles while maintaining direct oversight of implementation. The Lawrence Gomez Institute for Adaptive Technology would train engineers and medical professionals in the learning framework methodology, ensuring that each application honored the individual rather than imposing standardized solutions. Diego had become an unofficial spokesman for the project, his 8-year-old perspective cutting through adult complexity to essential truths. When a documentary crew from the BBC interviewed him about his father's work, his response went viral in its own right. "Dad doesn't make things for broken people," Diego explained to the camera with matter-of-fact clarity. "He makes things that help people remember they were never broken. They just needed better tools." The quote appeared on T-shirts, inspiration posters, and social media profiles around the world. More importantly, it captured a philosophical shift that was spreading beyond disability advocacy into broader conversations about human potential and technological responsibility. Messi herself had become an inadvertent advocate for the new approach. Her daily life, documented through social media posts and video updates, showed the learning framework not as miraculous healing but as practical enhancement of existing capabilities. She attended school, participated in art classes, and even joined the drama club, her exoskeleton so seamlessly integrated that classmates often forgot she was using assistive technology. "The point isn't that I can walk now," she explained in an interview with Teen Science magazine. "The point is that I never stopped being myself.
The technology just learned to work with who I am instead of trying to make me into someone else. Her perspective influenced how other young people with disabilities saw their own situations. Support groups reported increasing numbers of teenagers and young adults who were asking not, "What can I learn to accept?" but "What becomes possible when I have the right tools?" The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas. Automotive engineers began incorporating learning framework principles into adaptive vehicle controls. Video game designers developed interfaces that adapted to players with different physical capabilities. Even smartphone manufacturers started exploring how their devices could learn individual users' accessibility needs, rather than offering one-size-fits-all accommodation features. Lawrence found himself invited to speak at conferences ranging from medical symposiums to technology innovation forums. His message remained consistent. The most powerful technology was that which enhanced human capability rather than replacing it, which learned from individuals rather than imposing universal solutions. But the most meaningful ripple effect was happening quietly in workshops, garages, and makerspaces around the world. Engineers, medical professionals, and creative problem solvers were applying Lawrence's philosophy to challenges in their own communities. A physical therapist in Minnesota created learning framework-inspired balance training equipment for stroke patients. An engineering student in Brazil developed adaptive musical instruments that learned from musicians with different physical capabilities. Each application proved that the principles Lawrence had developed for Messi could transform how society approached human difference. The question was no longer whether someone could overcome their limitations, but what became possible when limitations were reframed as design challenges requiring creative solutions. The ripple effects continued spreading, carried by individuals who had witnessed what was possible when communities committed to seeing capability rather than disability, when technology served human potential rather than defining it, and when the impossible became simply a matter of finding the right approach, the right tools, and the right support. In helping one 12-year-old girl learn to walk again, they had taught the world to move forward differently. 3 years after that first desperate meeting in a cluttered workshop, Lawrence stood in the atrium of the Gomez Cooper Center for Adaptive Innovation, watching the morning light stream through windows designed to illuminate both literal and figurative possibilities. The building, which had grown from Victoria's adjacent property purchase into a world-class research facility, hummed with the quiet energy of breakthrough work happening in dozens of individual consultation rooms. The wall display in the main entrance told the story in numbers that still amazed him: 847 individuals now using personalized learning framework systems with adaptation protocols developed for 37 different mobility conditions. Research partnerships with 23 universities across 4 continents. Training programs that had certified 156 engineers and medical professionals in the individualized approach to adaptive technology. But the numbers, impressive as they were, couldn't capture what Lawrence considered the center's most important achievement: the fundamental shift in how society approached human difference. The philosophy that had emerged from helping one 12-year-old girl walk again was now influencing policy discussions, medical education, and technology development around the world. Messi Cooper, now 15 and serving as the center's youngest advisory board member, moved through the facility with the natural confidence of someone who had never learned to see her technology as anything other than an extension of herself. Her Mark IV learning framework, the 4th generation of her personal system, had evolved alongside her growing body and changing needs, adapting to her teenage growth spurts and activity preferences with seamless precision. "The new sensor arrays are responding beautifully," Jessica Park reported during the morning briefing. She had completed her doctorate and now directed the center's research division, her dissertation having evolved into the foundational text for adaptive technology development. "We're seeing 30% improvement in response time compared to the Mark III generation." Lawrence nodded, but his attention was focused on something more significant than technical specifications. Through the atrium's main window, he could see the center's outdoor demonstration area where Roberto Martinez was leading a group of new clients through basic movement exercises. Roberto, now 11 and 3 years into his own learning framework journey, had become one of their most effective peer counselors, helping other young people understand what was possible when technology truly collaborated with human capability. "The peer mentorship program is exceeding all our projections," Dr. Patricia Winters added, consulting the tablet that had replaced her traditional medical charts.
Now serving as the center's medical director, she had pioneered the integration of traditional rehabilitation medicine with Lawrence's individualized approach. We're seeing 40% faster adaptation rates when new clients work with mentors who use similar systems. The success had attracted attention from institutions Lawrence had never imagined engaging with. The World Health Organization had invited him to lead a global initiative on accessible technology design. The United Nations was implementing learning framework principles in refugee assistance programs, creating adaptive mobility solutions for individuals whose injuries stemmed from conflict and displacement. Victoria, who had restructured Cooper Dynamics to focus primarily on adaptive technology development, entered the briefing carrying news that represented their most ambitious expansion yet. The Chinese Ministry of Health has approved our proposal for the Beijing pilot program, she announced, her executive energy now entirely focused on scaling compassionate innovation. We'll be establishing 5 learning framework centers across China, with full government support and funding for indigent clients. The international expansion represented validation of principles that had once seemed radically impractical. Major governments were discovering that individualized adaptive technology, while initially more expensive than mass-produced solutions, ultimately proved more cost-effective because of superior outcomes and client satisfaction rates. Margaret Sullivan, now heading the center's Comfort and Dignity Design Division, had developed interface systems that were being studied by fashion design programs at universities worldwide. Her work had demonstrated that adaptive technology could be beautiful, dignified, and personally expressive, rather than clinically functional. The Milan Fashion Week showcase is confirming our approach, Margaret reported with satisfaction that came from seeing her life's work recognized on an international stage. 7 major designers are now incorporating accessibility principles into their regular lines, not just creating separate adaptive collections. But perhaps the most meaningful validation was happening in the lives of the individuals who came through the center's doors every day. Lawrence watched through the briefing room window as a young artist named Anna worked with one of their newest innovations, a learning framework system designed specifically for upper body mobility enhancement. Anna's muscular dystrophy had progressively limited her ability to paint, but the adaptive system was learning to amplify her muscle signals, allowing her to create works with the same precision and expressiveness she had possessed before her condition progressed. Each person teaches us something new, Lawrence reflected, observing Anna's session with the kind of focused attention that had characterized his approach from the beginning. We're not just building technology anymore. We're documenting the infinite ways human creativity adapts to challenges. Diego, now 11 and following in his father's footsteps with an intuitive understanding of both engineering and human psychology, had become the center's unofficial young ambassador. His perspective, shaped by growing up surrounded by adaptive technology development, offered insights that often escaped adult analysis. "Dad always says we're not fixing people," Diego explained to a group of visiting medical students during one of his regular tours. "We're giving them better ways to be themselves. There's a big difference." The distinction had become central to the center's training programs. Medical professionals and engineers from around the world came to Riverside Heights to learn not just technical skills, but the philosophical approach that made individualized adaptive technology successful. They studied Lawrence's methods, but more importantly, they learned to see each client as a unique individual whose capabilities deserved enhancement rather than standardization. The center's success had attracted corporate partnership offers that could have generated enormous profits. Technology giants wanted to acquire their patents, manufacturing companies proposed mass production deals, and venture capital firms offered valuations that would have made everyone involved wealthy beyond imagination. Lawrence had declined them all, maintaining the center's commitment to accessibility and individualization. The Gomez-Cooper Foundation, established with Victoria's business expertise and Lawrence's technical vision, ensured that learning framework technology remained available to anyone who could benefit, regardless of financial resources. "We measure success differently here," Lawrence explained to a group of potential investors during a facility tour. "Our return on investment isn't calculated in profit margins. It's measured in lives changed, possibilities realized, and communities transformed." The approach had proven sustainable through a combination of research grants, government partnerships, and corporate consulting fees from companies that wanted to incorporate learning framework principles into their own products. The center operated profitably while maintaining its mission of serving individual needs rather than market demands. As evening approached and the center's daily activities wound down, Lawrence found himself in his original workshop space, which had been preserved as both historical artifact and functional workspace. The tools his grandfather had left him still occupied their places of honor, alongside the modern equipment that had made their breakthroughs possible. Messi often stopped by this space during her regular visits, drawn by the quiet atmosphere where their journey had begun. This evening, she worked on homework at the same workbench where Lawrence had first sketched the prototype that would change her life. "Mr. Gomez," she said, looking up from her calculus problems, "do you ever think about what would have happened if my mom hadn't found you that day?" Lawrence considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned that the most important moments in life aren't accidents. They're the result of people being ready to see possibilities that others miss." Messi smiled, returning to her homework with the natural movement that had become second nature to her. The girl who had once feared she would never dance again now moved through the world with a grace that inspired everyone who knew her story. Through the workshop windows, Lawrence could see the lights of Riverside Heights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in those lights were families who had found new hope through the center's work, engineers who were applying learning framework principles to challenges in their own communities, and young people with disabilities who were growing up believing that their limitations were simply design problems awaiting creative solutions. The center's mission statement, carved in wood above the original workshop entrance, captured their ongoing commitment, where human potential meets innovative possibility. Below it, in smaller letters, Diego had added his father's favorite saying, "Everything can be enhanced if you have the right tools and enough heart." 3 years ago, a desperate mother had brought her daughter to a humble carpenter, hoping for a miracle. What they had discovered was something more powerful than miracles: the recognition that human potential was limitless when communities committed to seeing capability rather than disability, when technology served individual dreams rather than mass-market assumptions, and when the word impossible was simply an invitation to think more creatively. The Lawrence Gomez, who had once fixed tractors and luxury cars in a modest garage, now directed a global movement that was transforming how society understood and supported human difference. But his fundamental approach remained unchanged: listen carefully to what each person needs, use the best tools available, and never stop believing that better solutions are possible. As he prepared to close the workshop for the evening, Lawrence reflected on the journey that had brought him here. It had begun with a promise to help one girl walk again. It had become a commitment to helping the world move forward together. And every day, in consultation rooms and research labs, workshops and classrooms around the globe, that promise was being renewed and expanded, one individual breakthrough at a time. In helping Messi Cooper discover what her body could still do, Lawrence Gomez had helped humanity discover what was possible when limitations were treated not as permanent boundaries, but as temporary challenges awaiting the right combination of compassion, creativity, and unwavering determination. The legacy continued to grow, carried forward by every person who refused to accept that impossible meant forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.